Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back here on day 2 of the summit. Thank you for coming. And I'm really sure that we've got a humdinger of a day lined up for you. Good morning, Minister. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on day 2 of our summit. It's fantastic that you're able to join us and the over 800 people that are registered over the 2 days. So it's been great to have you. I know you're a real passionate champion of community and voluntary charities, social enterprises, and I look forward over the next 25 minutes or so having a good discussion with you. So, buckle in and very welcome.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. Very, very happy to be here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just to sort of get off on picking up on what Paul just said now in terms of welcoming the remarks by An Taoiseach yesterday from the perspective of where he said that his government is, quote unquote, fully committed to supporting and empowering, our members and community and voluntary organizations and charities in their work. So as we all know, and it's been said yesterday a number of different times and in many different forums as well, past year has been a very challenging time for charities and indeed for all of us in our society. But it's been your first experience of coming into government and as a sort of a junior minister in a really area that's so close to your own history and heart. And I guess what has been your experience of minister over this time in dealing with the key issues related to the sector and what the sector is facing?
So we only have 25 minutes to answer, do we? Yeah, well, that's a big question. Look, obviously it's been very uncertain for the sector. I suppose it was uncertain for everyone if you go back 12 months ago in terms of what we were looking at. Obviously the funding situation was very concerning to people. People didn't know if they were going to be able to keep people on. But I think the commitment that the Taoiseach spoke about, look, the proof is in the pudding, I suppose, in terms of what I would say for a start was the Stability Fund last year. The second bite of that towards the end of last year, and then more recently as well, the kind of new restructured one that's particularly focused, I suppose, on trying to help those organisations that didn't get assistance in the first 2 rounds of it as well. Mm-hmm. So in terms of what the experience has been like, I suppose for someone who's worked in the sector pretty much all my life up until I got elected, it's been difficult in the sense of not being able to meet organizations on the ground and see people on the ground and stay connected to the ground and get the energy back and get the issues back. But it's very clear it's been, I suppose, very challenging for the sector. We've done lots and lots of online meetings, and when we were able to, there was a couple of in-person meetings, distance and all as they were. But I suppose the underlying uncertainty that the sector has faced for a very long time was heightened last year. And I hope that the Stability Fund and other funds as well, I suppose the CSP support programme and other measures that we've taken have helped with that uncertainty, but have sent a clear message, I think, I hope, to the sector of the value that we place in them. But I am also heartened in terms of how the sector has adapted and how the sector has shown its value, I suppose, over the last 12 months. I don't think any government department now cannot really look at their relationships with the sector and say, we need to strengthen these. We really relied on these relationships over the last 12, 14, 15 months. So for me, I'm delighted in a way that the sector has shown its worth in areas that perhaps people didn't realize it had worked as well. And there's a couple of reasons I think that happened, in that community voluntary sector can respond quicker sometimes in the state. It's got more of a presence, I suppose, as well on the ground, and that really proved of value. And it can innovate quicker as well. And I think the state can learn a lot from the sector in terms of what the community and voluntary sector did over the last 15 months or so. So, and then at the same time, kind of coming more closer today, there is still a lot of uncertainty there as well in terms of, the country is opening up now. This week was a big week in terms of that. and there's going to be a different type of uncertainty going forward now when doors open up again, so there'll be new challenges. A lot of them have already manifested, I think. And again, we have to thank the sector for identifying that and for reacting already to some of them new challenges. So I'll be committed to, thankfully now, hopefully this month as well, actually starting to meet projects on the ground and hearing them challenges as we go forward over the next couple of months and the next couple of years, and standing with the sector and supporting it as we meet the new challenges that, dare I say it, post-COVID world will bring as well.
Thank you for that sort of general sort of overview and personal perspective of where you've been coming from, because you said something there in relation to, well, you mentioned the Stability Fund. So to note that this fund had actually been announced, I guess, in the days just before our summit last year, when Kevin McCarthy, Secretary General with the department, spoke, and it was absolutely, I guess, fantastic to be able to give the update to the people who attended last year that the department had engaged in such an open and constructive and supportive way to understand the challenges and to do their best within the system to actually lead out on a response that ultimately became the Stability Fund. So I think it's really important to mark that and to sort of acknowledge that. And the way that it has continued in the latter part of the year last year, and indeed with the newly constructed version this year. And I guess that's a really interesting example of where I wanted to go next in terms of the changes, because we'll come back to the challenges facing the sector again, but that's just in terms of the positive things that have happened, the innovative solutions that the sector was able to bring to bear, the partnership working between the sector and the state, and not just in the wonderful example that we all heard through those radio ads that played so often in our homes as we were working from home, many of us, about the unique partnership between the government, the community and voluntary sector, and the local authorities. And that came in over the months under this brand, the community call, and the community response. And I think that was a really interesting partnership. But we saw it in many other places. We saw it, and our members are reporting to us, the enhanced relationships that the pandemic has brought, whereby the focus was less on the paperwork and the accounting for pennies, but actually the focus on the people in communities and the outcomes, and the enhanced cooperation between charities and community and voluntary organizations themselves. In terms of an example of that would be those two examples and coming together, but also between the sector and the state. And it was really more about being seen as partners and on the same side, rather than as, I guess, subcontractors or people that would be commissioned to do a thing that the state wants to be delivered. So I guess in terms of trying to hold on to some of the good things, and we this phrase, build back better, and I think more people are using the phrase build forward better, actually, as a way of saying, no, we don't want to go back, we do want to go forward better in terms of the post-COVID world. Are there routes that can be followed, in your opinion, that would enable this type of cooperation to continue? You mentioned as a launch that you did recently at the end of March about a really important report that ourselves and Carmichael had commissioned with the partnership and funding of DRCD, which was about the support needs of community and voluntary groups, and what's needed to help them make that contribution. And you had said at that point in time that you had written to all government departments to see how they were engaging with our sector. And I guess it'd be very interesting in the light of the question about how can we build forward better in terms of better relationship, better partnership between the sector and the state. And is there any update on whether the departments ever got back to you, or where you might be thinking of going with that? Because I think that would be very interesting to maybe package and bank some of those wins, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Gosh, there was a lot in that question there. So I've made a couple of notes, and I'll try to address a couple of the issues that you raised. I guess in a very general sense, going forward over the next few years while I'm in this position, I do see myself as having a role of championing the sector with other government departments as well, and pushing it up into their agenda and making them realise how dependent other government departments are on the sector generally as well. And I think as a whole, we are dependent on the sector for good advice in terms of how to do good public policy. We're dependent on the sector for exploring new ways of doing things. We're dependent on the sector for feeding up the issues from the ground as well. So going forward and sort of raising the consciousness of the sector within other government departments as a sort of a first exercise, I wrote to ministers and asked them, well, can you measure the level of engagement your department has had over the last 12 months? I didn't pick, it was 2019 as a sort of a more normal year to start with. And most of them have written back. Reminders have gone out to some. And very interestingly, some found it difficult to get their head around the question, partly because they were so enmeshed with the sector as well, and because they depended on it so much, they kind of thought, oh my God, how do we count all of this? How do we measure all of this? And so that in itself, I think, was useful to make government departments realize that we're talking a lot to the sector, but we're not really necessarily writing it all down and not perhaps acknowledging how dependent we are on them. So we're not finished that first exercise yet. We're a little bit of dialogue going over and back, kind of explaining what we're looking for. We weren't particularly rigid on the metrics that we were looking at because this is the first year we're doing it. I do plan to do it every year. So there's a little bit of experimentation going on in terms of, well, what's the best way for departments to count this as well or to measure it as well. But on the whole, so far, I think it's a very positive exercise because it's got departments thinking as well. So that's where that is at the moment. The whole partnership side of thing is the relationship is very important as well. And obviously our 5-year strategy for the community and voluntary sector was built on partnership. It was a collaboration between the state and the community and voluntary sector. And I think when I'm engaging with other departments and other ministers as well, and when the officials here are doing likewise, something that we're going to continue to emphasize, because it had started before I came in here, is the broader value that community organizations bring as well. And you mentioned commissioning, you mentioned the sector being as a sort of a subcontractor to do something. And I think if government is doing that, and we do it a lot, there has to be a better recognition of the broader value that community organizations bring. So, for example, if a community organization is providing support to someone who's looking for a job, and that person really can't ever see themselves in a job, they've never had a job, they don't feel they have skills, their self-confidence is really low, they don't have a CV. If that community service brings that person from that position to thinking that, okay, no, I have a shot at getting a job and I now have a CV, that's an enormous value. And it's a value that perhaps we haven't been good at measuring as a state. And it's something that's possibly of more value than a job-ready person actually getting a job. And another service helping the job-ready person get a job. It's a further distance traveled, I suppose. Yeah. And I use the phrase, sort of a Freudian slip, but our SciCap program does use this tool called the distance travel tool to specifically measure that kind of, what some will call soft progress, but for someone who's really in that situation, it's a very big step. So I suppose that's just a little example, I think, of the level of understanding I'd like to push in government departments as well, and the appreciation levels, I suppose, for what we do, because a lot of these services as well, a lot of services is such a reductive term, but a lot of community and voluntary organizations, they offer a safe space, they offer an open door, they're trusted, and like trust is huge if you're trying to do something new, if you're engaging with new people. Trust is such an essential element, and a lot of these small community groups across the country have that. And I'm not sure that's always measured, something to procurement or commissioning or whatever. I'm not sure there's a number put on that, but there should be. I don't know how we do it, but it's not always done, I suppose. Yeah, so those are some.
Yeah, and I guess picking up on that, in one sense, the trust issue and what the hard to measure, the intangible benefits of that kind of relationship of trust with community organizations, large, small, and everything in between. You realize when you don't have it as a society, when you look back over the 15 months and the relationship that individual people have had in terms of the sense of solidarity, the sense of shared common good, in terms of the amount of restrictions that people have been allowed, they have imposed upon themselves for the benefit of others. And I think that glue that keeps that trust flowing in society. I know we certainly in our sector would see very much the fabric, the soft fabric of society in that sense, the invisible fabric, which is anything but soft, because actually it's that kind of interrelationship and interconnectedness that I think we've really, as a country, been able to bank on and draw on our reserves, in that sense over the past 15 months. And I guess maybe if I could come up with a suggestion in terms of how we can do that. I guess you spoke before about bringing those community call people together, not just the departments, but, if there is no answer about how to progress the relationship and how to make things more of a, I guess, partnership style, we're on the same side here, working for the betterment of communities and people. Maybe in one sense, there are ideas that no one fixed answer will come up with it. Maybe it's really complicated, but maybe I guess an initiative that involves the sector to try and actually just come to terms with how we can contribute from our shared perspective, from 360 degrees, as to how to embed that would certainly be a welcome initiative, because I know it's something that you mentioned before in terms of bringing people together to try and answer that question, as together.
Yeah, no, I do think we need to put all the key actors from the community call initiative back together. And in terms of timelines and being practical about it, I think we're looking at perhaps the autumn now, and to look back on what will then be the last 18 months, and particularly reference the NESC report, which really kind of named the value of the community call and the new things that were done, and to see how we can retain it and build on it as well. And I think a lot of it is about investing in people as well, and I want to draw this in because I think that's a key role that the state can play in terms of the community voluntary sector, and we have prioritized it in terms of the 5-year strategy as well to get some progress on that this year. And we've identified 3 levels of organizations to firstly do a needs assessment on. Primarily, number 1 is local community development committees. We'll have a report on that at the end of June. Then we're looking at boards of management, so smaller community and voluntary organizations. And then kind of third, we're looking at the really small community groups as well to see how we can support them. So it's a bit of quid pro quo is the wrong word, but a bit of a recognition that that the state needs to support the sector, and one way of doing it is to invest in the people as well. And I think in the week that's in it would be remiss of me not to mention a volunteering week as well, a national volunteering week, and just to flag our commitment to that as well, with the fact that we've opened 7 new volunteering centres this week across the country, and that's not just a signal, that's hard evidence that we do value the sector broadly speaking as well, but particularly potential volunteering, and volunteering in a safe, structured, valued and very publicly recognised way as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you pick up there, I think rightly, on the very important need to focus on people, and investment, I guess, in keeping people within organisations, paid or unpaid, to be able to, I guess, make their contribution in the best possible way to the public benefit and the public good that every charity or community group or voluntary group or social enterprise, we all have that thing in common, that we exist for the public benefit. I guess one of the issues that our members are signalling really loud and clear in that space is the real challenge in relation to staff and people, volunteers as well in the sector, including recruitment, progression. I guess mental health issues and burnout, are highlighted as issues in the report that you launched back in March, but we're seeing it again in every wave of our member survey. And that relates to like practical issues about, a level playing pitch in terms of working conditions, between the organizations in our sector and indeed the organizations and similar work that's being done in the public sector. So it's a real challenge in terms of actually being able to, I guess, staff, and I mean that in a sort of paid and unpaid sense, but staff the engine room that these organizations embody in terms of partnership with the state. So initiatives that tackle, I guess, that issue in its entirety would be important, I guess, over the coming while, because that is one of the single biggest issues we're hearing from our members.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I draw from my own experience here as well, that when you're in the sector and you're at the front line, you're there because you choose to be there, because you're really committed to a particular issue or a particular community or a particular way of doing work, and everything comes in the door, and you don't necessarily have an easy filter or an easy way to close the door as well. So it can be overwhelming even at the best of times, not when there isn't a pandemic. Mm-hmm. So I think particularly for a lot of organizations over the last 15 months or so, particularly those that were dealing with a lot of the new issues that were coming in large volumes, it's been very difficult. And I suppose it's about the question of sustainability as well, in terms of what you as an organization or even as a person can do and can commit to doing over a long period of time as well. Because my experience of getting things done and getting some level of social change, be it smaller or bigger than that, is that you have to stay with it. You have to keep plugging away. You have to be persistent. So you have to measure. You have to get your head around how you can keep doing that, I suppose, over time, even when it's really difficult, and when the pressure is on, because sometimes we just won't be able to deal with everything that's coming in the door or coming into the service, or coming through the phone as well. So that sustainability in the non-green sense is really, really important for the sector.
Yeah, and we actually saw in the recent reports published by the Charities regulator that funding and organizational sustainability is actually the key list that charities have in terms of the impact of COVID. And I guess just in drawing the session, our conversation to a close, because we're actually in the last 5 minutes, it's actually been really interesting to talk to you. But in terms of the session that we're now heading into, which is where we have a really interesting panel looking at the role of the community and voluntary sector in shaping the future of Ireland. Let's call it post-pandemic, let's call it build forward better. But really it's just society, the economy, life as we know it basically in Ireland, and indeed our interactions with the international community, and in the week that's in it, we're seeing Ireland play a major role in the global landscape in relation to the terrible, I guess, tragedies that is unfolding in the Middle East. But in that context of shaping our future in Ireland and globally, and just give you an opportunity about what your thoughts are, your wishes, your vision, where you think the wheel and indeed the voluntary sector can make our best contribution from your perspective. This would just be great to hear from you before we wrap up in that regard.
Sure. I mean, I think I have no one set vision for the sector. The sector makes its own vision, I guess. And I am always conscious of it. When we say the sector, we mean so many different things, and it's very broad and it's got different meanings for everyone. But I think we're generally 99% agreed on what we're talking about, so that's good enough. I suppose the beauty of the sector is that it's kind of fluid. If you're trying to picture it as a shape, it's constantly moving and it's constantly getting into spaces that the two other sectors, say public and private, don't do as much. So I think if you're to kind of look at its future going forward in relation to them two areas, public and private, I think there's relationships that can be developed and enhanced on the public side of things. The public needs to, the public side, the public third needs to understand the sector better, and I think that's part of the vision that the community and voluntary sector sells its value, explains its value, make sure that the public side understands the breadth and the full holistic nature of its value. And I think on the private side, there's things to be done as well in terms of how the community and voluntary sector engages with the private side. We will hopefully at the end of next month have a landscaping report published on the whole area of philanthropy. That's an area for future development. And I think there's good things coming as well in terms of the whole area of social innovation. It's something that happens on the ground in every community in one way or another, but I think we're going to look forward to putting more of a shape on that policy-wise going forward as well. So the sector makes its own vision, I guess, but I suppose I would see myself and ourselves here in the department as of having a role to kind of make the space and give the supports to let it do that. I suppose that's where I would situate ourselves.
And do you have any final or closing remarks that you wish to make in terms of anything that I haven't asked you that you wanted me to ask you? Now would be
not hugely. I suppose I'll go back to the week that's in it in terms of National Volunteering Week, and just to acknowledge all the work that people have done, not just over the last 18 months, but over years. I know a lot of people in their communities, they just do it. It's second nature to them. And we shouldn't take that for granted. It's really important not to take that for granted. And maybe just to flag something as well that'll be coming up next week as well, our own SICAP program and the local development companies that man that and implement it on the ground. The work that they've been doing over the last 15 months or so as well has been extraordinary, and a lot of it has gone under the radar, and it's something that we'll be pushing out and promoting next week or the week after. I'm not sure we have the dates pinned down yet as well, but just to acknowledge all their work as well.
Yeah.
And just to say that I think on that whole social inclusion side of things, I think that's where a lot of the value of the sector is and will grow into as well, I think, over the next couple of years. And I'd certainly be supporting it to go in that direction too.
Right. Well, Minister, with that, I will thank you for your first, I guess, appearance at the Wheels Annual Summit. And thank you for your time. Thank you for the work and the commitment that you've made to the sector. And indeed, in working with the Wheel over the past, not quite a year since you've come into the role. It seems like a generation has passed since then, and yet it's not even quite a year. So thank you again, and I will hand back now to Paul, who will introduce the first, the panel session of this morning. And I will say thank you very much from a personal to you, Minister, and indeed to all of the people who've come along this morning and today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.